Hello and welcome to the Consistory of the Coelc YouTube channel. I'm your host for this video, Reverend Zabel of St. Evangelical Lutheran Church located in Dalby, Queensland, Australia. And today I'm going to be addressing a question: is taxation theft? Now, this is a great slogan bandied around by libertarians, and I've sadly heard it bandied around also by even some so-called confessional Lutheran pastors. So the question is taxation theft? And the short answer is no. No, it's not. Goodbye, video over. No, sorry. Taxation is not theft. And the main reason it's not theft is because theft is a sin. And yet Jesus told us to render taxes unto Caesar, and St. Paul even tells us to pay taxes to the government. So therefore, taxation is not theft. The real question is, could it in some circumstances be theft? And the answer is kind of. So let's really look down at the different types of tax. What is the purpose of tax? And there's kind of like three purposes of tax that I can think of myself. If you can think of more purposes, you can let me know in the comments below. But basically, the main three ones are paying the government, welfare, and public services. So the first one is like paying the government. The worker deserves his wages, as scripture teaches. And so governments as public servants, whether that be a king or an elected politician, if they're working for us as our public servant, they deserve a bit of an income. And how do we get that income? Well, clearly we get that from taxes. You kind of get this happening with the priests in the Old Testament, in which they were allowed to take portions of certain sacrifices to feed themselves. So that was their payment for working in the temple. This is something that God had commanded the Levites to do. So yeah, if you have public servants, whether that be a king or an elected official, they're working for the citizens, and the worker deserves his wages. So government deserves wages. Now, we can probably disagree on whether they should be paid more or less, but they should be paid something, and we have to get that something from somewhere, and so that's generally through taxes. Now, the next form of taxation is public services, public goods. And this is definitely not theft. This is actually quite a logical use of tax. So if we go back to ancient Rome, for example, where the context of Jesus and Paul are talking about, Rome provided things like the military, the roads, and things like that. And if you have a government that provides things like public hospitals, public schools, these things need to be paid for somehow. And so they are a public good. You use public roads, well, guess what? Someone's got to pay for those. And if it's the public roads, public meaning of the publius, of the people, then the people should pay for it. So obviously there should be some taxes to help pay for public goods. I mean, if you go and live in like a share house with some people, you all contribute to the rent. If you go and like have to repair the house or whatever, you might all contribute to the repairs. So it makes sense that if there's public goods, public services that are serving the public, that the public should pay for that. So therefore there should be taxes. Now the final one, and this is roughly where there could be some level of theft taking place, and that's the question of welfare. See, the government actually has a requirement to provide and care for the less fortunate. And this is in scripture, particularly in the book of Ezekiel, where God criticizes the shepherds of Israel, the kings of Israel, for not taking care of the sick and the injured and the young and the old. Kings were responsible for looking after the orphans and the widows. So there is actually a biblical principle for governmental welfare. Now again, we can argue over the exact details of what welfare should be provided, who should get welfare, and all that. But government does have a responsibility to look after their citizens and provide at least the needy with welfare. And again, where is the government getting that money from? Well, it needs to come from taxes. It needs to come from somewhere. So in those cases, definitely taxation is not theft. Now, taxation could be theft in more of an extreme welfare society, such as like a communist society, where the government just takes everyone's money and then they divvy it out as they deem fit. There, it's theft because in that case, you're not getting to keep any of your money. It's not like your money is going to pay a public servant. It's not like your money is going to pay for services you use. It's not like your money is going to help the government help the less fortunate in your country. It's just the government taking everything you have and doing with it as they please. And Hermann Sasser actually has a good statement on this. He, in his writings, really condemned communism, and he says, see, communism sounds nice because it sounds like charity. It sounds like we're taking care of the poor. But the difference between communism and like Christian charity is that Christianity says what is mine is now thine. I am taking what is mine and I'm voluntarily giving it to those in need. Whereas what the government does with communism is they say what is thine is now mine. The government says what belonged to you actually now belongs to me, the government, and I will do with it as I see fit. And that's not fair. That's not right. That form of taxation would essentially be theft. Because it's not the government, needing some funds from the citizens of the nation to provide for things of the citizens of the nations. It's the government just taking everything from you, saying that you don't get a right to any of your property, and that the government then gets to dictate what happens to your property. That the government owns the property, and then the government, as essentially the god of the state, gets to determine what happens. And that kind of taxation is sinful and would be considered theft. Because it's not the government requiring some funds for you for governmental jobs that they are called and put in place to do. Because you see, the government is put in place to look after its citizens. So they are servants, so they do need a wage. Since the government is to look after its citizens, they are required to look after public things. Public parks, public schools, public roads. If it's something that belongs to the people, the government is, as representative of the people, responsible for looking after those public areas. And again, the government, as our called representatives, are to look after the most needy in our society. So these are actual responsibilities and appropriate roles for the government to fulfill. And therefore it is appropriate for them to require taxation in those situations to fund those appropriate endeavors. But a communist society is not an appropriate endeavor for a government to take. For them to just take everything from its citizens, say its citizens cannot own any private property or any private money, and the government must own everything, and the government must control and dictate everything. That is not an appropriate role of the government, and therefore taxation in that case would not be appropriate, and that would be considered theft. So I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye and God bless.